The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to stand and speak on an issue that I think is not only of importance to all the members in this House, but I think is of great interest to the Canadian public at large from coast to coast. This is, of course, dealing with Bill C-42, an act to amend the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Act. And to start off and put this in context, I want to pick up some of the themes that were mentioned by the honourable colleague from Hamilton East, Stony Creek, who I think gave one of the most thoughtful speeches on this subject or on any subject that I've heard in this House in years. Because what he touched upon and what I think is important to touch upon is the special relationship that Canadians have with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I don't think that there is a more memorable symbol of our country around the world than the iconic Royal Canadian Mounted Police figure. It has played a pivotal role in the history and development of Canada and is responsible for delivering police services and community safety services in communities across our country, in every province, I believe. Of course, this long storied history is not uncheckered. It has not been perfect like any organization. It has had its challenges in the past and it has its challenges today. But the job that we call upon of our RCMP women and men across this country is one that is of utmost importance to Canadians, and it's one of the most challenging and difficult ones that can exist. These are the men and women who we expect to answer calls in the middle of the night, often alone, to be first responders at times of crisis, tragedy, and emergency. These are men and women who we expect to be the first people on the scene of an accident to deal with death and injury. These are the people who we expect to put their lives on the line in defending our communities and to keep our people safe. And I think for that, all members of this House join together in expressing our deep gratitude and respect for the men and women of the RCMP. At the same time, the RCMP is an organization that is facing some serious challenges. And I start by asking myself, in 2013, is it possible to create a national police force that has a proper civilian oversight structure? Is it possible to construct a labour relations framework that not only gives management the tools that they need in order to ensure that there is an appropriate standard of conduct for the staff that work under them, as well as a fair structure for the men and women to ensure that they have access to justice and are treated fairly and equitably? Is it possible in 2013 to expect that we can have a national organization that can deal promptly, swiftly, fairly, and adequately with important issues like sexual harassment? And is it possible to have a modern-day police force that meets the expectations of Canadians? I think all members of the New Democratic Party say absolutely we can do that. In fact, we should do that. Now, Bill C-42 is the Conservative government's response to long-standing claims of sexual harassment in the RCMP and to some difficult scandals that have made headlines as a result of problems with the disciplinary process and, in fact, if we're honest, lenient disciplinary measures handed out to officers accused of serious misconduct. Bill C-42 proposes to amend the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Act in three main areas. First, it adds new provisions to the labour relations clauses and gives the RCMP Commissioner the power to appoint and dismiss members as he or she sees fit. Second, it seeks to reform discipline, grievance, and human resource management processes for members. And last, C-42 seeks to reform the former Royal Canadian Mounted Public Police Complaints Commission by establishing a, in quotes, new, end quote, Civilian Complaints Commission and implement a new framework to handle investigations of serious incidents involving members. And again, because of the immense respect we have for the RCMP, we can talk about some of these challenges. We've had cases where there have been deaths in custody. In my home province of British Columbia, some very serious questions raised about the conduct of RCMP officers when we've had civilians who have died while in the hands of the police. We've had over 200 women have joined a class action lawsuit alleging sexual harassment against members of the RCMP, and indeed the more disturbing allegation of a widespread, well-entrenched system of gender harassment within that structure. Now, Bill C-42 reiterates many of the provisions of Bill C-38 from the 40th Parliament, and at that time the NDP criticized that bill for not going far enough in dealing with these very important issues. A very significant difference from the former Bill C-38 and the present C-42 before the House today is silence on the issue of unionization of the RCMP, and I'd like to start there for a moment. There's already been a court decision that has struck down the labour relations structure in the RCMP as being unconstitutional. And I have said when I was public safety critic, and I say here today, that the RCMP, as the only police force in this country that does not have the right to have its men and women freely choose their bargaining representative and engage in free collective bargaining, is a national embarrassment. Yeah. It's also unjust to the men and women that all members of this House claim to support and respect. If we truly respect the men and women who we send into dangerous situations, should we not also respect their ability to decide who is going to go in and bargain the terms and conditions of their work and to raise concerns as any other group in this country is free to do? I think we do. And the fact that this government has still to this day not replaced the bargaining structure in the RCMP with a free collective bargaining structure that respects norms, not only that every work in this country expects, but also that is contained in international treaties to which Canada is signatory, is not acceptable. And that's one of the main reasons that we're opposing this bill, is that it is refusing to deal with this very important issue. Now, when you talk about sexual harassment, as my friend from Hamilton East Stony Creek so eloquently pointed out, one of the many workplace issues that organized labour has worked towards in this country and helped improve is the situation of harassment in the workplace, and of course including sexual harassment in the workplace. Because it's only by changing a workplace culture, it's only by changing the attitudes not only of management, but of the men and women who are in a bargaining unit or who are performing labour, that you can actually make meaningful progress. And you know, the fact that this government has failed to act as the court has directed it to replace the unconstitutional labour relations structure with one that actually conforms to our law and the legitimate desires of the men and women in the RCMP, is a contributing factor to the I think it's fair to say, poisoned context and situation that occurs in many RCMP detachments across this country. Now, the NDP supported the intention of Bill C-42 to modernize the RCMP and address issues such as sexual harassment in the force, and we voted for this bill to move to committee because we believe that it's important to work with the government to try to bring in effective legislation, and we made that good faith attempt. And in fact, members of the New Democrats on committee proposed 18 amendments to help strengthen this bill and make it conform to not only the necessities of good legislation, but also to the dictates of previous commissions and the request of very informed, respected people who are knowledgeable about the RCMP. People like former RCMP Complaints Commissioner Paul Kennedy, groups like the Supreme Court of Canada, people like Justice O'Connor, who made recommendations in the aftermath of the rare inquiry as to how the RCMP could improve its standards. These are eminent people who are not partisan, who have made a number of deeply thoughtful suggestions as to how we can modernize and improve the RCMP. And the NDP wanted to help build that legislation. Unfortunately, this government, the Conservatives, rejected every single one of those 18 amendments, which is a common, for Canadians watching here, is a common daily occurrence in this chamber. Now, I've been in this chamber long enough to know that no party has a monopoly on good ideas. Sometimes they come from the right, sometimes they come from the left, sometimes they come from the centre. But this government, the Conservatives, have, I think, in an unprecedented fashion, governed by rejecting virtually every single idea that comes from any other part of this chamber because they are hyper-partisan and extreme. Now you hear the honourable members clapping when they're called extreme. I'll leave it to Canadians to judge the thinking that goes behind that. Now, I want to point out as well that this bill fails to directly address the issue of sexual harassment within the force. It fails to bring in a civilian oversight body that is truly independent. It fails to deal with the unionization requirements of the workforce, and it fails to put in an adequate system that will deal with sexual harassment. The New Democrats remain ready and willing to work with the government to fix those problems, and we urge it to do so, because the men and women of the RCMP in this country and the public deserve to have a modern RCMP that upholds the finest traditions of this force and makes it prepared for the century ahead. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.